Where is the electricity that you're talking about? Very few people have access to electricity, and those who have access to it cannot afford to use it for cooking. And I have had so many people tell us that we should use solar. And I asked, where are the solar cookers? I have never seen one that is used domestically. The one that I have seen is still under proof of concept, and you need to put it in the direct sun. So you need to wait until midday, sit in the sun, and then cook your food. The very reason as to why we don't put our charcoal stoves outside in the sun is now the very thing you're telling us to do.
113-kilogram cylinder of LPG avoids the deforestation of 6 square meters of forest in Africa. So 100 households switching to LPG saves a whole hectare of forest. And if they manage to achieve the IEA target for clean cooking globally, that could save 2 million hectares of forest per year. So even though it's a fossil fuel, it could end up reducing emissions because such high emissions already come from deforestation.
We have contributed almost nothing to global warming. And then you are telling us contribute the biggest to the solution by stopping us from living our lives, just the basics of our lives, like cooking. It does make me very angry, and that is why we are calling upon the World Bank.
Welcome to Saving the World from Bad Ideas. I'm Mark Lynas, and I've had a few bad ideas in my time. I used to go out in the nighttime to destroy GMO crops, and I also opposed nuclear power. But then when I looked at the science, I found I got it wrong. Oops! I've learned the hard way that none of us are right all the time. So now I'm here to challenge the assumptions that we all too often take for granted, because the future depends on us getting it right. Hello and welcome to another episode of Saving the World from Bad Ideas. I'm here with Patricia Nanteza, who's our Africa Lead for WePlanet. Hello, Patricia. How are you today?
I'm well, Mark. How are you?
Were you just saying that you'd lost electricity, or is it back on now?
No, the power has been gone for the entire day. It's coming to 5 p.m. in Kampala, and we haven't had power since 7 a.m.
It's kind of relevant to the conversation we're about to have because it's about, that's about energy use in Africa. But I'm kind of intrigued. Like, how do you get on with normal life if you've got no power, and how often does this happen?
Of recent, it has been happening a bit more frequently, maybe four days a week. The power tends to go off, especially during the day. And at night, it's on and off. You can have it for an hour and then it goes for 30 minutes. So I don't know why that is happening. But I think it's really horrible for efficiency during the day when people are at work. And what generally happens is that then people stop working and they sit by the roadside and chat until power comes back. You go maybe to the welder, you put in an order for windows. And they're like, but we haven't had power, has been on and off for the last 1 month or so your order will be delayed. Of course, the bigger corporates, they have backup generators, which the general population doesn't have. People like me who work from home, you have to ensure your battery is fully charged. If it's not, you drop off during the meeting or you stop working and you just wait.
So you're talking are you on a laptop or on a phone? You've just charged the battery. So how long have we got here?
Yes, let me see. I have maybe 80% battery power.
Okay, so hopefully we're good to finish the podcast, but I think this is just a really, really useful illustration of what the energy situation is like. I mean, Uganda's not unusual, is it, for sub-Saharan Africa in terms of having the electricity going out all the time?
No, I think we are quite representative. This happens across Africa.
So I wanted to talk because we're co-authors of a new WePlanet report, which is satirically titled "Just Stop Cooking," and we need to give the credit to that to producer Rob, who came up with that fantastic title. Give us a wave, Rob. Thank you. And but it's a deadly serious message, isn't it? And the sort of this podcast is about saving the world from bad ideas. Obviously, it's a really, really bad idea that Africa should just stop cooking. But tell us, where the idea for this campaign came from and why it's such an important message for people to hear right now.
Okay, so the idea for this campaign came from the fact that Africa, the second leading cause of deforestation in Africa is cutting down trees for charcoal. And so why we came up with this idea is that then while we are thinking about the energy crisis, why is it that Africans cannot use electricity? We went down, should I call it a rabbit hole? And it led us down to, at the very basic of it, what is driving climate change, what is driving the energy crisis, and how can we come up with a more immediate, more practical solution to this. So the topic of conversation today is energy security. If we want Africa to stop cutting down our trees, that means we must stop cooking. And then someone will say, what has deforestation and cooking gotten to do with each other? Like I've told you, we use charcoal, we use our trees to cook. So if you tell us protect your environment, you're basically telling us you should stop cooking or move to electricity. And like we have shared at the beginning of this conversation, power is always on and off. And I live in an urban area. That is why I have the luxury of having power on and off. The majority of Africans, almost 80% of Africans, do not even have access to electricity. So then at the end of the day, when you look at everything wholesomely, if we are to protect our environment, we must stop cooking or switch to electricity, which is impractical right now. Yeah, the access is very, very limited. And those of us who have access, it is intermittent, but it's also very expensive. I would like to consider myself to be a middle class African, and other than boiling water in my kettle, I don't use electricity to cook. If I found anyone trying to sneak anything, cook on electricity, I would lose it. Are you the one who is going to pay the power? Do you know what it costs? That would be the conversation that would ensue. So it's the impracticability of us using electricity, which is cleaner, or continue using the biomass fuels, which are not only bad for our health, but also bad for our environment, that brought us to this satirical message of just stop cooking. Either way, we are doomed. Electricity, we don't cook because we can't afford it. You tell us to protect the environment, still we don't cook. Because we protect the environment, we have no fuel.
Yeah. And so I was just reviewing some of the stats for this. I mean, it's really an incredibly large death toll. It's one of the biggest sources of mortality around the world. Indoor air pollution caused largely by people cooking inside their houses using solid fuels, so using charcoal and wood in particular. According to the World Health Organization, it's the total global death toll is 3.2 million people worldwide each year. About 250,000 of those deaths are children under 5. In Africa, it's 1 billion people cooking on wood and charcoal for their household fuels, and the resultant household air pollution from these fuels causes 700,000 premature deaths. That's in sub-Saharan Africa, and that's 10% of total mortality, which makes indoor air pollution a bigger killer than malaria. I mean, do you see this at first hand? So, if you're traveling and you're in a village, and can you see children coughing? Can you see respiratory disease? Can you actually see evidence of this of this health burden from indoor air pollution?
Not, I would say you cannot necessarily say that person is suffering from indoor air pollution, but I have been around people who cook using firewood. And it's unacceptable practice that you must cough. The smoke naturally makes you cough. And, of course, you're tearing from your eyes. So you see that indeed there is an effect of the smoke. But from a non-medical person, you may not realize that this actually is a problem. However, I have heard of people who have died because they locked themselves inside their tiny room with a charcoal stove. And it happened just very recently, maybe a month ago. I actually heard of a lady not very far from where I stay. A woman and her little child. Her child is maybe 2 years. So the woman woke up early in the morning, 6 a.m. She works in the market, and she was preparing breakfast. So she lit her charcoal stove, and put on her kettle to make breakfast for her and her child. And then she never woke up. How did I get to know? Because I had sent someone to buy for me a bed in the market. And when he got there, he told me, everyone, there is fracas. People are trying to break the door because this woman is supposedly dead. And I asked him why. So he told me, it must be they suffocated because there was no fire. Their house didn't catch fire. But by around 8:30, the neighbors were like, no, this woman usually leaves home very early. Why isn't she coming out? And they broke her door only to find her and her little girl dead.
Oh dear, that's very tragic. You think it was smoke inhalation or maybe carbon monoxide if they had
Yes.
if it was poorly ventilated? But I mean, this shows all of the dangers, I guess, of relying on combustion inside the house. But describe to us, like, this is people all around the world don't know what it's like to cook in a village in Africa. Can you describe to us the scene? Like, what's the average household doing to cook their food?
Okay, let me describe two scenes because what you call a village, let me call it a rural area, and then an urban or a peri-urban area. So in a rural area, people usually use firewood. So you get three stones so that to create a stove, and then you just place firewood sticks in between the stones, and you light your fire, and you place your saucepan on it, and you light the fire whenever you need to cook something. The thing about charcoal is that firewood eventually breaks down into pieces of charcoal. So in the village, they cover that with ash, the ash that came from the burning process, so that maybe when you cook at around midday and then you want to cook something again at 6 p.m., you don't have to start the fire again. You just remove the ash, put grass to light up the fire, and then put more firewood, and then you have your evening meal. So that is what happens in rural areas. But then you'll ask, where does the firewood come from? Of course, this is a job for mainly women and children. When they go to the well to fetch water, usually they come back with a bundle of firewood that they will use for that day. So fetching firewood is a daily chore, like fetching water for cooking. So that is what happens in a rural area. In urban areas where we don't have a lot of access to firewood, because firewood is also it has a lot of smoke. You need a wider area where you can cook from. So in urban areas, we use charcoal, which now is a byproduct of burning firewood. And so in urban areas, we have these little charcoal stoves that you usually keep in the corner of your house or in the corner of your kitchen. You light it whenever you need to cook a meal. For it, it's a bit faster. You can light it using anything. You can light it using paraffin. You can light it using pieces of wood or paper. So you light it, it catches fire, you cook whatever it is that you're cooking, and then pour water on the charcoal and wait until later again when you need to cook, and repeat the process.
Why can't people just cook outside the houses on these three stones? I mean, that would be, you wouldn't have to inhale the smoke if you're not cooking it inside your house.
I think basically people don't cook outside for so many reasons. One of the reasons is definitely the elements. You cannot cook in the noonday sun. It's very hot. And then in the evenings, of course, it's dark or it's raining. And most houses do not have a designated area that is a kitchen with a chimney. So what people usually do is, because you want to cook away from the elements, you carry your charcoal stove and put it in a corner somewhere in the room where you stay. But of course, there are also those urban houses that have a tiny kitchen where people now can put their charcoal stove. Because also you need to realize that the majority of people in urban areas, especially those in the informal sector, can afford to rent maybe just a room or a house that has only a bedroom and a sitting room. So everything must happen in the sitting room. Your kitchen, your dining, life happens there. So it's basically a lack of space and not being able to cook from the elements.
Right. And in the rural area, women and children mainly have to go and fetch their own firewood. Presumably people are chopping limbs off trees and to get the wood supplies. What about charcoal then? What's the supply chain? Because when I've traveled through Africa, I've seen these big white sacks stacked up by the roadside, all full of charcoal. So there's people who are clearly selling that commercially, and that's going into urban areas. Is that right?
The charcoal value chain starts, of course, from the rural areas where someone, usually a man, will cut down a tree. That tree can be their own, or you can go and actually buy a tree from someone. You cut it down, cut it into pieces, and then build some sort of should I call it like a tunnel? A kiln, maybe. I don't know what to call it. Put the huge pieces of wood, the huge logs in there, cover it with mud, and then set it on slow fire. And then the firewood breaks down into charcoal. But maybe just to mention that it's mature trees that actually make the best charcoal, because then it's harder, it lights for a longer time. You cannot cut down trees that are maybe 5 years or younger. It needs to be fairly mature trees, 7 and above. The older the tree, the better the quality of the charcoal. So you burn it down and then you sell it. Usually usually there is someone who walks around and who goes around villages and buys now the charcoal. And then that person sells it to the transporter. There are 11 people in the entire charcoal value chain, from the guy who cuts down the tree up to the lady or the man who sells it in the market. So it is transported from wherever it was burnt, brought into urban areas. And then in urban areas, there are two kinds of consumers. The consumer that can afford a big sack, a big sack of charcoal in Uganda currently. And by big sack, we don't buy things in kilograms. So I don't know. But the things that you talked about, Mark, the white sacks with the charcoal, popping up above.
Probably about 20, 25 kilograms, I'd say.
Yeah,
they're pretty
maybe.
Big sacks.
It goes for about maybe $40, that big sack.
That's valuable. Yeah, that's valuable stuff. That must be a big source of income to people. I mean, that's presumably why there's such high rates of illegal charcoal, even in nationally protected forests, right? There seems to be a big problem with deforestation caused by charcoal burning. Is there a whole sort of criminal enterprise which is supplying this charcoal? How does that work?
Yes, absolutely. There is a lot of criminal enterprises, especially in the recent past, where countries have been making charcoal illegal. So definitely the charcoal trade now goes underground. It goes underground. Still everyone in the entire value chain now has to operate on the black market. The person cutting down the trees, the transporters, and you see from transporting in the rural area to the marketplace. Of course, there are officials, the law enforcement officers. Those ones must also be bribed. And the destination of charcoal is not always national or only national. We actually export charcoal to Kenya. Uganda exports charcoal to Kenya. Uganda exports charcoal to South Sudan. So there is also the international aspect.
You said the national governments actually are trying to ban charcoal. So it's already official government policy in several African countries, is it, to try to suppress the charcoal trade? For what reason? Is it because of the pollution issue or the deforestation issue or all of these things?
No, it's purely deforestation.
Mm-hmm.
The rate at which our forests were disappearing because of our charcoal needs was high. And then the governments have moved in to make it illegal.
Of course, There's no point, if you make it illegal, it just goes underground unless you've got an alternative. So what is the alternative to fuel wood and charcoal for domestic cooking in sub-Saharan Africa? What's the best alternative?
The best alternative would be what we call LPG, liquefied petroleum gas, which is cooking gas. in the interim because it has very similar characteristics to charcoal, minus it being a pollutant. It's affordable. You can buy it in small chunks. Before we came to the alternative, I was telling you that there are two kinds of charcoal consumers. The consumer that buys the big sack, and then there is the consumer that buys charcoal every single day because it's also sold in very tiny sizes. And that is the commonest consumer. You go every day to the market, you buy a little, use it for that day, and then wait for tomorrow. Because the biggest bulk of our population is in the informal sector and they earn money every day. So that is why LPG now is the second best alternative, because you can buy a small cylinder. LPG is mainly sold in 6 kilogram and 12 kilogram cylinders, and of course the bigger ones that are industrial. So you can buy small cylinders which require small amounts of money, carry it into your home, use it, and when it's finished, you go back, and by that time you've saved up a little money from your informal job, buy another small cylinder. Yeah. So LPG is the next best alternative.
And so this gets to the heart of our campaign, because we need to see African governments able to support the further rollout of LPG for cooking in sub-Saharan Africa in order to avoid deforestation and to avoid all of these hundreds of thousands of deaths from indoor air pollution. And yet the World Bank is not able to support this because it has this ban on fossil fuels. And, you know, the report that we're launching shows really just how pernicious this has been, because you've had governments in Germany, in Norway, officially through their representatives in the World Bank, telling the World Bank that they can't support fossil fuels anywhere. That means they can't support it in Africa, and they can't support it even for the purposes of cooking gas, which could save so many lives and and keep Africa's forests standing. So it's a real, it's an incredible injustice that we're trying to highlight here, in the name of climate change, because because of the fossil fuel issue. And so I think all we're asking for, right, is for an exception to be made so that people in Africa can cook using LPG. Otherwise, the alternative is to ask Africans to just stop cooking, which is the satirical video that I think you yourself participated in the filming of that. I mean, tell us what the joke is there, and why that's actually kind of no joke at all to people in Africa.
We talked at the beginning of the conversation. You have put a ban on a fuel that is most practical in our circumstances. The Global North is telling the World Bank, Africa, you cannot use LPG because it's a fossil fuel, and we know the effect of fossil fuel on climate change. However, you're also telling us, Africa, the second leading cause of deforestation on your continent is cutting down trees for charcoal. You need to stop. So you're saying, do not use charcoal, do not use LPG. And then we're asking, what exactly should we be using? And you're telling us that the Global North, through the World Bank, is telling us, with charcoal and LPG out of the way, we need you to use electric power. We need you to use solar. And we are also left in shock. Where is the electricity that you're talking about? Very few people have access to electricity, and those who have access to it cannot afford to use it for cooking. And I have had so many people tell us that we should use solar. And I ask, where are the solar cookers? I have never seen one that is used domestically. The one that I have seen is still under proof of concept, and you need to put it in the direct sun. So you need to wait until midday, sit in the sun, and then cook your food. The very reason as to why we don't put our charcoal stoves outside in the sun is now the very thing you're telling us to do, that we should, use solar cook stoves, sit out in the sun and use them. And in any case, they're just still proof of concept. So when you look at the entire ecosystem of the fuels that we are being given an option to use, the World Bank is basically just telling us, just stop cooking in the meantime until we sort out the solar cookers, until we sort out electric penetration on the continent.
Yeah, because if you don't have electric grids, I mean, the price of electricity is a problem, right? The price differential is already too high. I mean, could support from the World Bank make a difference here, do you think, and be able to make LPG as an alternative more accessible to people like throughout the income distribution, so even the very poorest?
Absolutely. Absolutely. How support from the World Bank would help is that then it could enable our governments to give us subsidies. So that the price of LPG goes down, and this could be our government saying, we are going to take away value added tax on the price of gas, make it more accessible. These programs do exist. The Ugandan government was running a program on subsidized LPG. I think it's still ongoing. It's funded by the FAO, Food and Agriculture Organization. But they said this program is only available to government teachers. If you're a teacher and you work in a government school, and they named, I think, 4 districts in northern Uganda. So that is how limited it is. It is being given to a very tiny section of society in a very tiny part of the country. And why is this? It's a funding issue. Now imagine if a big lender like World Bank would come on board and enable our governments to subsidize LPG, then this campaign can then be rolled out in the entire country, on the entire continent.
So I was looking into why this de facto ban on fossil fuels seems to be so widely interpreted. And, all of the big green NGOs have been running campaigns saying there shouldn't be any fossil gas investment in Africa. They were demanding a couple of years ago a commitment from the World Bank Group to end all types of financial support for fossil fuels. And this is the Sierra Club, Friends of the Earth, US. And they weren't making any, in fact, they were saying they should, and this is a direct quote, ending all fossil fuel finance in Africa. And so that's not making any exception for cooking gas. It's not making any exception for the fact that these electric grids don't exist and that people have no alternative other than to just stop cooking. And to do this in the name of climate change seems, I think, to all of us to be a really horrible injustice, given the differential of historical responsibility. I mean, who's used the carbon budget entirely here and taken us to this crisis point? It's not. I mean, what are the historical carbon emissions of people in Uganda? Very orders of magnitude less than those of the global north. So, how does it feel to you to be told that fossil fuels aren't for you because we in the global north have now used up the entire carbon budget?
Ordinarily, it should get me angry, but it doesn't, because I'm aware of the fact that we all speak from our own perspective. The Sierra Club, I don't know where they are headquartered, but they sit in their offices and they look at their lives in the US. And they say they can't afford to use electricity to wash their clothes, to cook their food, and run all the video games for their children. And then they imagine that the rest of the world is like this. So before I even talk about how I feel, I would very much usually like to recommend to people in the global north that before you speak for us, maybe you need to take a trip down to Africa. Just pick any African country, because our situation is usually the same, and then see exactly what is happening. While I was describing how cooking on an open fire, firewood or charcoal, which you guys call barbecue, you just barbecue, use it over the weekend or during summer. That is what we do every single day of our lives. So it helps for you to understand that this solution that I am recommending to these people, what exactly is happening in their lives? What is their lived truth? And then you can speak from that point of view. But away from speaking from people's lived experiences and perspectives, of course, it does make me very angry, and like so many other Africans, that we did not lead our planet to the catastrophic situation that it is in right now in terms of climate change. We have contributed almost nothing to global warming. And then you are telling us contribute the biggest to the solution by stopping us from living our lives, just the basics of our lives, like, like cooking. So it does make me very angry. And that is why we are calling upon the World Bank. But we are also very aware that behind the World Bank, there is influencers that you talked about, the green NGOs, forcing solutions that would ideally be solutions for the global north, forcing the World Bank now to force those so-called solutions onto us in the global south. So I am very angry about that. But another thing that also makes me extremely angry is that the World Bank has primary data. They know what is happening in Africa. When they are being forced by these NGOs and people who've never been here, why on earth don't they speak up? Why don't they say this is not the reality in the global south? While we were writing this report, we did quite a bit of research, and we realized UNICEF, World Health Organization, the World Bank, they are all very aware of the challenges that using biomass fuels is causing to us, health-wise and in terms of the environment. And they have recommended LPG as a transitional gas. But then they don't go ahead to implement these things. Then they don't go ahead to speak up and say the reality is different. And I am wondering why don't they do this? Are they in this business for indeed improving the quality of lives or making their stakeholders happy? So for me, really, my anger is directed to the World Bank because they have the knowledge, they have the data. Why do they refuse to act on it?
Well, I think the reality is that the World Bank's shareholders haven't allowed them to invest in this, and that's why, in particular, the experts we spoke to mentioned Germany and Norway, and it's especially ironic because Norway, of course, is itself a huge oil and gas producer, and its people have become incredibly rich, and it has an enormous sovereign wealth fund worth trillions. And they're telling the World Bank to not invest in fossil fuels in the global south and in Africa in particular, where it could save so many lives. So it's particularly, I think you're being almost a bit too generous, really, to given the levels of hypocrisy. And in fact, I did some figures on this to just see the amount that Europe's actually spending itself on fossil fuels. So the whole of sub-Saharan Africa's total LPG use currently, right, equates to a single large LNG import terminal in Europe. And there's several of these being built. There's new ones in the Netherlands. There's new ones in Germany, right across Spain as well, right across Europe. They're putting huge amounts of money, billions, into new fossil fuel capacity, while telling the World Bank that people in Africa can't have these same levels of fossil fuel. So it's Germany currently has so much LNG capacity under construction. That's 3 times more than the entire current LPG use of sub-Saharan Africa. So that's actually a lot worse than just ignorance. This is blatant hypocrisy.
Absolutely, I agree. And for you have sovereign funding, so you can use your sovereign funding to do exactly what you're stopping us from doing. So this also then, I think, it ties in well with the with the argument that Africans have had for a very long time, that the World Bank and people in the global north, they really just want to keep us. They just want to keep us in poverty, because then how do you explain the basis of such demands, the basis of such bans? If LPG, if gas is so horrible, why then do you continue to build more gas terminals in your own countries to ensure that your own people continue having access? And for us, just because we're poor, you're telling us, no, you need to protect the environment. First, then reduce your own consumption, put a halt on new gas terminals, and then you can come and preach to us about LPG and the like. So indeed, this is extremely hypocritical. And we are calling out this hypocrisy, and we are saying, just stop it already.
Yes.
Yeah.
And Germany, of course, lost its Russian gas supplies, and that's why they're building huge amounts of LNG import because, of course, they don't want the lights to go out and they want industry to keep going and they want German consumers to continue to be able to cook their food when they do use gas. So it is absolutely, as you say, one rule for the rich countries and one rule for the poor. And actually, again, just another figure here, like if we're only calling for enough LPG for people in Africa to everyone to have access to clean cooking facilities. And according to the IEA, the International Energy Agency, that just means a 3 times increase in LPG. And if you give all of sub-Saharan Africa access to clean cooking with LPG, that means African emissions would total a quarter of Europe's emissions just from those new LNG terminals and pipelines that are under construction. So it's really tiny, even making the climate argument. And we should probably explain here what the difference is between LNG and LPG. As you said at the beginning, LPG, liquefied petroleum gas, so that's butane and propane gases, which are produced as a byproduct of oil refining. And they go into little cylinders and they're very easy to move around, which is why it's such a good alternative to charcoal and fuel wood. LNG is liquefied natural gas, which is transported on these gigantic tankers, which then has to be regasified to go into the pipeline network. So that's mostly methane. What's interesting is that propane and butane are actually not greenhouse gases, whereas LNG is mostly methane, and that actually is a very powerful greenhouse gas, as well as, they're all causing CO2 when they're burned. So I appreciate this is a bit confusing for people who aren't up on LNG and LPG and so on, but the numbers that we present in the report actually calculate the differences, so we can actually compare and contrast and see that these numbers are pretty much the same. Like, just as I say, one of these big LPG terminals is pretty much the whole of sub-Saharan Africa's gas consumption. It's a bit complicated, but in this report we work out the carbon budgets, so we can actually compare like for like with LNG and LPG. I did want to talk a bit about the potential for LPG and cooking gas to reduce deforestation. The industry actually says that 113 kilogram cylinder of LPG avoids the deforestation of 6 square meters of forest in Africa. So 100 households switching to LPG saves a whole hectare of forest. And if they manage to achieve the IEA's target for clean cooking globally, that could save 2 million hectares of forest per year. So what's weird about all of this is that the World Bank saying to you in Africa, you can't use LPG because it's a fossil fuel, but actually it could be carbon positive, this whole thing, because you'd be avoiding deforestation, which also puts a lot of carbon in the atmosphere. So even though it's a fossil fuel, it could end up reducing emissions because such high emissions already come from deforestation. So, it could be a net win for the world. It could save so many lives, and it could also save the forest at the same time as reducing the climate change problem. But because we've got this hang up about fossil fuels and there not being any investment in it, then the World Bank's being prohibited from investing in it. So just to finish up, what are you in WePlanet Africa calling for?
We are calling for the lifting of the ban on financing fossil fuels, on financing LPG by the World Bank. So we are telling the World Bank, remove the ban, support our governments through financing, so that they can then make LPG available to everyone on the continent. And that way, you will enable us to move away from biomass fuels. The World Bank and the African Development Bank have come up with a project called Mission 300, where they are saying they're going to move 300 million Africans of the 600 who are still in the dark onto the electric grid by 2030. So while you are working on that, in the meantime, enable us to move to LPG, and then eventually, when electric power becomes more accessible, available, and affordable, we shall move on. We are not asking the World Bank to subsidize LPG so that we stay stuck at LPG. No, we want to use LPG only as a transitional fuel, as a transitional source of energy, as infrastructure and everything else that is being worked on, and eventually move to the really clean sources of power. But there is a hidden advantage there, Mark, before we finish, that I would like to also highlight. What transitioning an entire continent onto LPG will help in terms of demand is that then we shall build a certain behavior in our communities. People will then realize that, oh, by the way, you can actually cook using a cooker. And then when you ask these people to move away from their gas cooker onto an electricity cooker, it won't be very strange. So there is a hidden advantage in moving people onto LPG, because then you're building a certain behavior, you're building a certain convenience, and then eventually when we get to that point, we can actually consume this electricity. We can use it to cook our food. We can use it. It won't be strange when you tell us you can cook, you can wash your clothes using electricity, because then we have been exposed to the different uses of clean energy. But that will not happen when you ask us to leapfrog from firewood or charcoal to electricity. We'll be fearful. Like, okay, then how do I cook my food? Will it be tasty? Yeah, things like that.
Well, and the power's out for you right now. How are you going to cook your dinner tonight, and for your kids?
Charcoal. I energy stick. I use charcoal and gas.
So you're using LPG. When you say gas, you mean LPG
yes,
on cylinders?
I use LPG for the quick things, but for the slow cooking things like beans and beef, then we use charcoal, but just a little bit of it.
Okay, so you're on your own transition there to fully electrified cooking, are you?
Yes, absolutely. And I boil water with electricity. The only thing that I can bear cook on electricity for now.
Yeah, I think that's such an important point to end on, because I think we all agree, whether we're a big green NGO or German government or or an African consumer, that ultimately electricity is the best fuel of all. It's completely clean in the house. It can be generated completely cleanly, whether it's solar, wind, nuclear, whatever. And that's got to be the way to go. But it's going to take time. You haven't got the grid infrastructure. It's not there. The power's still going out, as we've seen even recording this podcast. And so people need to eat today. They need to eat tomorrow. They need to eat next week, next month. And that's not time for this transition to happen. So that's why LPG is such an important transition fuel out to 2030 and beyond, when Africa can be fully electrified.
Yes, absolutely.
Well, thanks, Patricia, for joining us. Best of luck with the campaign. We're all working on this together, and hopefully the World Bank will change its mind, as it did on nuclear fairly recently, and come in with a strong program to support LPG, because it's vital to save lives and to keep Africa's forests standing before it's too late. So good luck with it, and thanks again for joining us on Saving the World from Bad Ideas.
Yeah, thank you very much. But as the World Bank thinks about it, I think at the back end, like you mentioned, that they are the World Bank shareholders. I think these green NGOs should be educated about the damage that they're causing to Africa before they make certain demands of the World Bank. They should ensure that these demands are fair, these demands are just. And I recommend to them that they should go after their own governments and stop them from building new LNG terminals, but then encourage the World Bank. If they're really in this business for fairness and justice, they should then actually come and join us on this campaign and encourage the World Bank to remove the ban, so that justice can be served down here in the Global South.
Well said. And if they don't have time to go and visit Africa and see it at first hand, they can also read our report, which is available on juststopcooking.org, isn't it, Producer Rob? Yeah, it's nodding. And Producer Rob did all of the wonderful layout and design. And we've got a forward from the Ghanaian State Minister for Climate Change and Sustainability, which is also really, really critical to have an actual African government weighing in behind this campaign and saying this is what we want to see. So anyway, thanks again, Patricia Nanteza, for joining us, and we'll hope to see you again soon.
Sure. Thank you, Mark.
Thanks so much for listening to Saving the World from Bad Ideas, a WePlanet podcast. WePlanet's a movement of citizens and scientists dedicated to defending the science and solutions we need to save the world. Please do subscribe and share a nice review, it helps us spread the message. We'd also love to hear your feedback and suggestions at our email, podcast@weplanet.org. Please also join our podcast mailing list and we'll let you know when a new episode drops. Just go to savingtheworldfrombadideas.org or weplanet.org/podcast right now. See you next time.